the final resolution to my status would not take place until well after college, and in fact did not take place until a few weeks ago. But all of that will be the subject of our Q&A, which should start right now. So, I'm done talking. We should have questions.
So what is that final resolution that's in place
Yeah,
a few weeks ago?
That's a glorious question. Final resolution of my status is that I am a permanent resident. But my application was approved after an almost 2-year wait. I had a spousal petition. My longtime girlfriend and I got married in the spring of March 2015. And we immediately filed, and then the delays and tarrying tactics of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services kicked in. And we can talk more about those tactics and the intricacies of the application in a moment. But what occurred when I finally found out that I had permanent residency was that I didn't really feel I got much in the way of relief. I've been reading, at the time the decision came down, this marvelous novel by Imbolo entitled Behold the Dreamers. This novel had been recommended to me when I was in Tenafly, New Jersey in January. I gave a talk at the Kaplan JCC, and one of the parents in attendance there said, there's this new novel, it's about Cameroonian immigrants, you've got to read this. It's like all about these immigrants' interface with the immigration system and how infuriating and maddening and debilitating the immigration system is. And so I mentioned this book to my wife, and then for Valentine's Day, it just showed up at home. You know, she knew what was good. I devoured this book. One of the passages of this book that stood out to me is a scene where one of the two protagonists, Chenda, is in conversation with his lawyer. So he has filed on his and his wife's behalf an asylum application. But things are not looking good for the asylum application. And the lawyer says, don't worry, you're going to be stressed out for these next few years, but when you get that citizenship, no one can second guess you. And you'll finally be able to breathe easily and begin living your life in America. Now, in this frame of the book, this exchange is set up as to be undermined, because the remainder of the book will show that A, this dream of citizenship will not come to pass for this family, but B, that even for those who are fortunate to get permanent status in the form of a green card or in the form of residency, the anxieties do not go away. They are replaced by different anxieties, some of which can be as wrenching as the ones that have preceded them. And when I read this, I had just found out that my application had finally been approved. And I, in conversation with my wife and with my family members, said, well, you know, it's great that, you know, sooner or later a green card will come in the mail. But, and this is now where we get to contemporary political developments, there's not that much that is heartening about this, given what is happening to green card holders, even now. And in the wake of some of the programs launched by the administration, both in the form of travel bans and in the form of administrative guidance provided to the Immigration Service, it has become clear that no matter what one's immigration status is, one is in danger. One is permanently in danger of being classified for any number of reasons and according to any number of criteria as no longer fit to be in this country. And this is all the more salient if you happen to be black or brown.
I have a few questions and comment. One, when you had the Dubois 10th conversation with your brother, how old were the two of you?
This conversation began when he was still in prep for prep.
Okay.
So he was 12, and he was 11, 12, and I was 16, 17. I was 17 when we had the first full blowout of this conversation. He had just finished prep. And he went to Riverdale. And so we split my volunteer mentor's arc. I ended up going to collegiate the entire way, and my brother went to Riverdale the entire way. He then reposed the question with greater insistence and vehemence when he was in high school and I was in college. Because by the time he was a junior at Riverdale, he had grown to hate it. And so he was like, at one point in the course of this back and forth about the Talented 10 business, he said, we're just guinea pigs. I mean, we're just experimental fodder for them. So what is our purpose here? Like, what are we doing for these schools other than to be these tokens? And I said, well, you know, we're like helping to transform these schools from the inside, all that. But he was like, I'm not taking any of that. Like, be real with yourself. Like, what is the dent you feel you made at collegiate, right? And since then, I think he would take a step back and say that, on balance, we were positioned and we did individually and collectively make changes to the school cultures of which we formed part. And we helped change discourses in some ways. But I think we would both agree that those changes are not in themselves enough to address some of the larger structural issues that we see as pervasive and that determine the contours of our lived experiences in much sort of more insidious ways, right? Now, you got a comment.
Sure. Yeah, a couple more questions also. Thank you. In regards to your brother, what is his current status, and do you feel any, in regards to that, discomfort with your status, you know, that you may still carry even after you achieve status? Do you feel that if he's not documented, that there's potentially some danger that you can bring by putting it in your book?
So because he was born in the States, he has citizenship by birth. So,
Gotcha.
but I mean, that created all kinds of tensions, some of which I explore in the book, between us, because, and now we get to the sort of older, younger brother tensions, older, younger sibling tensions. When I was younger, I thought that he had it easier. I told him this on more than one occasion. I was like, look, my whole life is uncertainty, and you at least have citizenship. And you are protected from some things that I'm not protected from. But I mean, of course, I realized in time that this was, first of all, this was like not exactly the best way to mentor someone. You know, like tell them, oh yeah, your life is easy, my life is hard, blah. But I hadn't taken into full account until I was in college, and then until after I graduated college, that the burden of worrying about what would happen to his mother and his older brother could be so corrosive for him. Because it permanently occupied a space in his mind, and there was no real way around that for him. So even the decision in his case of where to go to college was fraught with all this anxiety, because by the time he was applying to college, I was not in the U.S. I had left the U.S. And he had to deal with, well, you know, if I go too far away from home and then mom gets like rounded up or whatever, like, what am I going to do? You know, like what is my responsibility to this situation? And it was trying to understand where he was coming from that posed particularly acute challenges for me. But that in time I felt I got to the place of understanding.
It's powerful stressors. And my comment in regards to your dealing with the microaggressions and your approach to engagement at many levels with police, with different demographics, I find that pretty amazing that you were able to navigate that. You know, from my concern, from my own, you know, being in the independent school track, I have two in that. You know, I was somebody who was familiar with Wu-Tang and the birth of hip hop from the early 70s. And my children don't necessarily have that perception of life. So some of that, you know, I'm concerned with how they come into contact with some of that information, things of that sort. Just my comment. Yeah, I find it amazing, though, that your ability, the things that empowered you to have positive engagement in some of those adverse situations are pretty commendable.
Well, thank you. That is not. it helped that, you know, I joked earlier that my mom was resolutely against our listening to certain kinds of music, which was like immediately flouted by both of her sons, right? Especially, my younger brother was even, in what I saw as one of the perks of being the younger, he was very comfortable with flouting her directives on this. I was still, you know, I had to like do it on the side and all that. My brother was like, I will listen to whatever I want, whenever I want, and it's gonna be fine. But one of the things that Mom had encouraged us to do, and something that she modeled in her own being, was to be incredibly adaptable. To be adaptable not just in the sense of sort of like bending ourselves to suit the imperatives of any given situation, but to try to learn from any of the contexts in which we found ourselves, to really derive lessons that we could then apply in other domains of experience. And this came in very, very handy when I entered these different spaces where, in fact, there was like a sort of barrage of microaggressions, right? Because I had to do some learning about myself, and I also had to do some learning about other people. So what exactly was motivating these microaggressions in the first place? I mean, like, what kinds of previous exposures had people had that conditioned them to think that it was like somehow cool to like address me in this way, or to insinuate these things about me? What could I do to get them to think differently? Now, there was some decentering that had to come with even that question too, because in time, as both my mom and then later on several of my close friends, and eventually my wife made it a repeated point of emphasis, there is only so much that any one person can do. I mean, you will have to commit, as my wife put it once, to the forms of collective action that enable people to work together to dismantling this kind of stuff. It's not, in the end, it can't only be about, you know, you the striver trying to navigate this complex system. It has to be about setting up structures that enable groups and communities to come together around shared objectives that will, in the long term, dismantle that system. But that, at its heart, is what I see as so important about the kind of work that is done in spaces such as these, right?
Thank you.
I have two questions unrelated to each other. The first is, what would you, as a mentor to young men of color, having had your experience and, you know, going up through the private school route, what would you offer as advice to a young male of color that is navigating the same track as you? That's question one. Question two, how's your mom? What's her situation? What's her status? And also your younger brother, what's he doing now? Where did he go to school?
So I answer the second one first, because I can answer it pretty snappily. So my mom became a U.S. citizen. She became a U.S. citizen because I mentioned in the book that she began dating someone a while after she and my dad broke up and got divorced. And their decision to plight troth was held up for a long time by my mom's insistence that he annul his previous marriage. My mom was like a real serious Catholic, so she was like, gotta get that marriage annulled. Like, I don't care how you do it, but you gotta get that marriage annulled. Eventually, he got his own marriage annulled, and they were married. He was a permanent resident who had naturalized. So he was a Dominican who had come to the United States before the '86 immigration reform. And that immigration reform, which had been signed into law by Reagan, had come with something that is anathema to Republicans now, and that is amnesty, right? The '86 reform came with a blanket grant of amnesty to people who had lived in the United States undocumented for a period of time. And he benefited from that because he had had a one-year gap in status after arriving in the States. After he naturalized, he and my mom got married. He then filed for her. She became a U.S. citizen, and she was able to vote in November. It did not turn out how she or I or any of us would wish, but she was empowered to feel herself more like a citizen by the act of voting, even though she already felt that she had been a citizen over the course of many years. My younger brother's finishing law school at Fordham, and he is preparing to enter a career that will expose him to new kinds of microaggressions, because he's going to be a corporate lawyer. He accepted an offer from one of the big firms, and he will be starting there in October. That is my brother's life update. And he's living in Queens at the moment, which has me all kinds of jealous, because I'm like, man, I just want to live in Queens. Gotta live deep in New Jersey now. What's going on? So, as for advice I would give to young folks of color navigating the system, I would give two pieces of advice. The first is that one should always read a lot. Read things that are well beyond your immediate lived experience. Things that take you to places and spaces that you might not otherwise inhabit. Things that will give you a vocabulary for making sense of your experiences. Now, some of that reading will intersect with your own identity as a person of color in these spaces, right? So I should point out a few books that were transformative for me, some of which bore quite directly on issues that I was encountering when I read them. So I was in high school, I read Invisible Man, and that book blew my mind. Because Ellison was so magisterial about Ellison's book, was that it put words to something that I experienced but could not probably verbalize, and that was the experience of feeling myself invisible, of being in all these spaces and of just being ignored, just being taken as the sort of background, as the wallpaper, or worse. But that novel was also important because it gave me a justification for the kind of reading I was doing at the time. So before you get to the novel itself, Ellison has this whole introduction. And in the introduction, he argues that one of the purposes of reading and writing novels is to be a democratic citizen. But he puts it in a really arresting way. He says that the product of imagining a fictional landscape, when done right, is exactly like the kind of communal enterprise we do when we get together and we try to agree on what our shared priorities are. So the act of fiction, the act of writing fiction, consuming fiction, is analogous, is on some level equivalent to the act of democratic community building. And when I read that, I was like, this is a wrap for me. Like this is why we read. But there were other books that I read that took me well outside anything I knew to be my own, or that I understood as being my own in any narrow sense, and in the process forced me to expand my boundaries of what I consider my own. So I read a lot of Russian literature when I was in high school. I continued doing this while I was in college. I read a lot of Russian novels. I have read pretty much every word penned on page by Tolstoy. I have read all of Dostoevsky's novels. I have read all of Turgenev's novels. I have read lots of Chekhov. And all of this provided me with an opportunity to venture out into domains and spaces that I had some sort of hazy exposure to prior to reading, but that did not come into focus, into sharp focus until I began reading. We could go on the book recommendation route all day, but I mean that's just simply to give you a sense of the underlying motivation of my exhortation. My second bit of advice, this is hard to internalize, but I'll lay it out there and then we can talk about it, is to not be discouraged by the fact that there are few people like you in the spaces that you will enter. Take that instead as an opportunity to gauge both why those spaces do not have people who look like you, and as an opportunity to figure out what you can do to leave a lasting mark in those spaces. You will be in environments where there is not only no one like you, there's going to be no one who has the same kinds of experiences that you have. There's going to be no one who has the same kind of wisdom that you have. But note my emphasis on wisdom. As you enter these spaces, you have embodied knowledge. You have lived lives. Your task, if you should accept it, is to bring the knowledge that comes with having lived the lives you've lived to these spaces. And some of that will involve things like checking people who say craziness. You can check them with whatever resources you think are necessary for the occasion, whether it's with humor and levity, whether it's with bullet-pointed criticism. Like the point is that you will be there to make interventions and to change people's consciousness. But of course, you can't do this all the time because it is taxing to do this all the time. If I had stepped in to correct every single racist or pseudo-racist misapprehension that one of my classmates had, I would have completely lost it well before, I did eventually lose it or whatever. So you will have to, as you navigate these spaces and as you try to figure out the kinds of embodied wisdom that you can bring to these spaces, make some time for yourself to just be yourself. Whether that's by reading, by listening to the music you like, by taking long walks. I take real long walks, like 10-mile walks. That's how we're living. Whatever you need to do it.
I would like to add, being from Russia and going through education in Soviet Union, we had to read a lot. I read less than you. I only read 2 Dostoevsky, not because I don't like to read, but because I have no time. So what amazes me is that coming from Soviet Union and going through that education, reading all the classics, why so many Russian Jewish immigrants who live on Brighton Beach, why most of them are Trump voters. Like, I just don't get it. Most of them have bachelor's degree in something. They were like good students in school. They read a lot of classics, and to me, it's incompatible to have a childhood where you had to read Russian literature, Russian classics. I feel like those Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, they were so ahead of their time, and what they wrote about still stands true to this day. And how could you go through the childhood reading those books and then vote for somebody like Trump being in the United States? I just don't get it. But that's unfortunately my experience, especially, again, maybe not like people who live in Manhattan who are into arts, and yeah, there are some like liberals, but most of immigrants from Soviet Union are Trump voters, and I just don't get it.
Yeah, this may very well be the subject for another point that we can sort of dwell on collectively, which is that the arts will not save you. So I believe firmly in the redeeming power of reading, for the reasons I mentioned earlier in connection with the first item of advice. However, as someone who has spent much of the past decade plus, like, trying to think about how people understand and appreciate the Greek and Roman past and Greek and Roman literature, I have to hand all these examples of people who were very happily reading Greek and Roman classics and then committing human atrocities on untold scales, right? And some of those examples are well known and some of them are not as well known. I mentioned earlier this dictator of the Dominican Republic, Trujillo, Rafael Leonidas, who was dictator from 1930 to 1961. And as I allude to very briefly in the book, my granddad, my maternal grandfather, fled the Dominican Republic for a few years because he had bad-mouthed Trujillo to people who turned out to be informants, and they beat the crap out of him and left him in a ditch thinking he was dead. But he was not dead. He managed to get himself together, and he fled the country until Trujillo had been assassinated, and he felt comfortable enough coming back. Under Trujillo, there was this real, sustained effort at getting members of the Dominican elite to buy into this idea of what we would call humanistic learning. Reading classical texts, reading Greek and Roman texts. But all of this was done to cement the power of the dictatorship. So Trujillo and some of his contemporaries were really, really interested in the Greeks. And one of the works that came out of this was this book published in 1956 entitled La Exterminación Añorada, the longed for, hoped for, waited for extermination. This book is, in essence, a genocidal tract. And it's a genocidal tract directed at one specific community in Hispaniola, Haitians. Straight up. It is a text that was written to justify the dictatorship's plans to target darker-skinned Dominicans and Dominicans of Haitian descent, And this is something that has like continued to be an issue in the Dominican Republic, and that has received a firmer legal backing, i.e. sort of state-sanctioned discriminatory backing, following a legal judgment in the fall of 2013. But what is this book about, and why did people read it? This book is studded with references to all of the Greek and Roman literature that this dude had read, and encouragements for people to reimagine themselves as processors and readers of these same kinds of texts, right? One of the shocks I had in reading this book is that it like makes use of Herodotus, who's one of my favorite ancient historians, and one who is incredibly rich as a sort of paragon of multiculturalism. Herodotus' text is all about how there are all these different communities scattered all throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond, and how all of their different practices do not ipso facto render these communities somehow abhorrent or somehow irretrievably other. They're just part of the same spectrum of humanity, however weird we might think some of their practices to be. I introduced this book to make a second point, one that's related to the kinds of readers who digest these works and then vote in certain ways. This book, La Exterminación Englorada, I came across when I was in high school in another space not too dissimilar to this one. One of the Dominican American friends closest to my family had a pretty well-stocked apartment library in the Wrangell houses, just north of the Polo Grounds, right? And we would go there. My mom would take me and my younger brother there because there would always be these like rosaries and novenas, and like they would have like these after church meetings there. And so one day I saw this book on the shelf of this library, and I asked its owner if I could borrow it. And she was like, sure, just take the book. And I took it, and as I mentioned earlier in connection with the How People Lived in Ancient Greece and Rome book, I never returned this book. And I'm really bad at this. I never return books I borrow. The woman who loaned me this book was someone whom I thought was like, as far as things went, like a sort of liberal progressive person. I mean, I was like coming into my own sense of what liberal progressive meant at that time. But someone who had an immigrant experience of her own, someone who knew how difficult life was for immigrants, who knew how difficult life was for black and brown immigrants in particular. So imagine my surprise when I opened this book and I discovered that she had marked it up with all of this marginalia in which she expressed her strong approval of these like resolutely xenophobic policies directed at Haitians, right? It was hardcore. Like some of these comments just blew my mind. I was like, oh my gosh. And what's even crazier about this is that this woman is a distant relative of one of the people who killed Trujillo. But like, I mean, that's like a whole other story. I mean, that would take us a whole other afternoon to analyze. So this foregrounds for me the fact that people read things and digest their own educational experiences within ideological discourses that for any number of reasons they've already been sort of plugged into. And so whenever I think about the kind of work I do in teaching works of any kind, whether they're Greek and Roman texts or modern writings, whatever, one of my first and overriding objectives is to be really straight up with my own students about what my ideological pre-commitments are. Like, I'm not gonna pretend that I'm something that I'm not, right? I'll say, look, I read these books with a very particular filter. I see these books as evocative of specific dimensions of the marginalized minority experience, or the subaltern experience, or the migrant experience, so on and so forth. And if you disagree with that, then like, let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about why it is that you access these books in a different way. Maybe that helps, maybe that doesn't. But to end on a note that you might find appealing, I will say that my parents-in-law, my wife's parents, voted for Trump. They voted for Trump despite the fact that their son-in-law was at the time engaged in the duel of his life with the Immigration Service. They've read my book, right? We've had all these conversations over the years about it. That did not matter. And that's where like things got really real, right? But you're like,
are they educated? Because I kind of get when someone is not educated might perceive Trump a certain way just because when they were in school they didn't read enough, they just like brainwashed but are your parents-in-law educated? Do they
They
have
do.
like bachelor's?
Well, so the thing
degrees?
is, I mean, this is like where we get into, so my father-in-law, went to college, then served in the military, he was in the Air Force for a while. My mother-in-law did not, but I mean, they were both pretty well read, and they reared 4 children who then all went on to university educations of their own, including, in the case of my wife, someone who got multiple degrees. But, and this is where I get to the ideological pre-commitment business. Man, the past few years, they've been watching a lot of Fox, man. They moved out to Florida, and that like locked their minds up. Like, it was crazy. Like at one point, so 2 years ago when I went to visit them, I was in the midst of reading Elizabeth Kolbert's The Sixth Extinction, which is this marvelous account of like how climate change is like radically altering our ecologies and microecologies. And so I showed the book to my father-in-law because we'd had conversations about climate change, and he had begun sort of like buying the whole Fox line about climate change. It's not real. There's always been climate change, and I was like, look, I studied paleoclimatology, so I can tell you that yes, there was climate change in the past, but not on this scale so quickly. Let's talk about why. So when we had a conversation about this book, he just began, he like vented, he like let out all of this stuff that was on his mind about why he thought that climate change wasn't real. But what I then recognized, and what I then called him out on, was that like every single thing he said was a bullet point from Hannity. I was like, your arguments are structured the same way that Hannity presented them on his show. I watched this clip. Like, I was like, I know it's good. And so there too, we now have a reckoning with forms of media that really do, by virtue of the myopias they promulgate, cause people, even who are like, or who were decently well educated, to detach themselves or silo themselves in ways that we might find to be shocking or like confounding, but that are very real. But I mean, we should also like do this kind of assessment on ourselves. Like, I mean, this is like, we have blind spots of our own, and every time that I say to myself, well, like, I can't believe that like, these like uneducated folk in the Midwest like voted a certain way, I should be like, well, like, what is it about the extent of my own ignorance that precludes me from being able to see what factors motivated them, and precludes me from not empathy, because I'm not sure that empathy is the right word, but from like having a comprehensive understanding of the emotional and affective orientation that folks have to, say, voting for Trump or whatever. So yeah.
Couple of questions, but first, again, I wanted to say how much I enjoyed reading your book. Your story is extraordinary. The students that I worked with in community college have found great inspiration in your story. Throughout the book, by all accounts, you're committed to success, and not only success, but excellence. And so I wonder what you attribute that to. What or who or?
All beautiful things are multi-causal, I'd say. I mean, my mom was very driven to emphasize excellence, and she would make that commitment manifest in ways small and not so small. And so there would always be, my mom is not mean, but she would ask questions if we did not bring back grades that were near perfect. She would say, so, that was a 90. Could have been 95. Could have been 100. Why wasn't it 100? Right? I mean, she also had other stratagems at her disposal, and whatever one of us really sort of did go off the rail and chose not to strive after excellence, she would have stronger words. But the other reason I think that excellence came to mean so much is bound up with an aspect of my and my younger brother's upbringing that does, in its own way, connect back to the Talented 10th business. It was this. We were from the earliest years of our maneuvering navigation through the sort of interlocking bureaucracies of our cityscape, whether it was the public assistance bureaucracy or the shelter bureaucracy or the housing bureaucracy, conditioned into thinking that one slip up could be disastrous. And that made middle and high school like a pretty high stakes game for my younger brother. It also made it at times like a really psychologically taxing high stakes game, because to feel that one can never mess up is to not allow oneself the opportunity to take risks. And in time, my brother became more comfortable taking risks because he began to see that this was like fairly inhibiting to feel sort of, to be paralyzed by the anxiety of not being able to stretch yourself or venture beyond what was known simply because you felt that one mistake would be all the difference. But there were other reminders in our landscape of what that sort of fine distinction between success and failure amounted to. So I mentioned earlier that I had become sort of hypersensitive to where I was in any space, in any environment. Well, that's because I knew that being at the wrong place would get me shot. Like one of my friends got shot when I was 11. I mean, he died right outside our building. Like, had I been out at the same time, I would have been dead. Like that's as simple as that. And these were not particularly heartening lessons. My mom was really, particularly after that incident that occurred when I was 11. I mean, she was terrified. I mean, she said, from now on, you and your brother will go like this particular way to school, and you will do this, you will do that. There will be no mess ups, nothing. But I mean, she had to deal with the fact that she couldn't control every aspect of our environment either, no matter how much she tried to control it. But it was that anxiety that grew out of those settings that really pushed me to valuing not just success in a sort of blanket sense, but the kind of success that I thought would, in my 15 and 16-year-old mind, would sort of bring us out of those settings and into a state of greater security. Of course, as I became older, I realized that one could enjoy all kinds of success and not be able to guarantee that form of security. And that was the most destabilizing realization of all, to recognize that what one had constituted, what one had been led to believe were one's distinctive or unusual or peculiar merits were not enough to, get you out of the hood or whatever. And that precipitated a minor crisis of confidence when I realized that. Because up to that point I had thought, if I just simply excel, if I just do better than everyone, then this is not going to matter. And to be confronted with, the reminder that there's some things that you cannot escape was, in my early 20s, among the most shocking and most infuriating issues to have to contend with.
What happened to Jeff?
Oh,
are you in touch with
yeah,
him?
Jeff and I are still in touch. So Jeff, near the end of the book I talk about how I reconnected with him in Paris, yay. But now he's living in Germany. He's living in Berlin. And I mean, we email every few months or so. He's a photographer in Berlin. He lives in the Kreuzberg neighborhood. And we emailed after the terrorist incident in Berlin had occurred, because he and his girlfriend had walked right by that outdoor market where the incident occurred, like a few hours before the incident. So I've written to him and asked, are you guys okay? So we're still very much in touch. And he comes back to the States once every year, and when he comes back, we go to a steak place. And we eat lots of steak, because I like steak. More questions? Are you just stretching? Or is it donut time?